All right, so chapter 14, when we left chapter 13, they had docked on Eros. They were going to um he was going to go to command school. He had finally agreed. He had talked to Valentine. Graf went with Ender, and they start talking about like the real motivation behind the Bugger Wars. How it's not that they're coming for a third invasion; it's that the humans are trying to go to them. Um, and Ender is starting to really put things together, that not everything is as they seem, and he got some revelations from Valentine, about the whole plot with her and Peter, on the nets, and stuff like that. So he's starting to get a lot of information, that sort of like puts things in context, the whole war and the political things that are happening, not altogether, um, independently of his brother and sister, and you know, such and so on. All right, so chapter 14, Ender's teacher. Took your time, didn't you, Graf? The voyage isn't short, but the 3-month vacation seems excessive. I prefer not to deliver damaged merchandise. Some men simply have no sense of hurry. Oh, well, it's only the fate of the world. Never mind me. You must understand our anxiety. We're here with the Ansible, receiving constant reports of the progress of our starships. We have to face the coming war every day, if you can call them days. He's such a very little boy. There's greatness in him, a magnitude of spirit, a killer instinct, too, I hope. Yes, we've planned out an impromptu course of study for him, all subject to your approval, of course. I'll look at it. I don't pretend to know the subject matter, Admiral Shamrajnagar. Interesting name. I'm only here because I know Ender. So don't be afraid that I'll try to second guess the order of your presentation, only the pace. How much can we tell him? Don't waste his time on the physics of interstellar travel. What about the Ansible? I already told him about that and the fleets. I said they would arrive at their destination within 5 years. It seems there's very little for us to tell him, left for us to tell him. You can tell him about the weapon systems. He has to know enough to make intelligent decisions. Ah, we can be useful after all. How very kind. We've devoted one of the 5 simulators to his exclusive use. What about the others? The other simulators? The other children. You were brought here to take care of Ender Wiggin. Just curious. Remember, they were all my students at one time or another, and now they are all mine. They are entering into the mysteries of the fleet, Colonel Graff, to which you, as a soldier, have never been introduced. You make it sound like a priesthood, and a god, and a religion. Even those of us who command by Ansible know the majesty of flight among the stars. I can see you find my mysticism distasteful. I assure you that your distaste only reveals your ignorance. Soon enough, Ender Wiggin will also know what I know. He will dance the graceful ghost dance through the stars, and whatever greatness there is within him will be unlocked, revealed, set forth before the universe for all to see. You have the soul of a stone, Colonel Graff, but I sing to a stone as easily as to another singer. You may go to your quarters and establish yourself. I have nothing to establish except the clothing I'm wearing. You own nothing? They keep my salary in an account somewhere on Earth. I've never needed it, except to buy civilian clothes on my vacation. A non-materialist, and yet you are unpleasantly fat. A gluttonous ascetic? Such a contradiction. When I'm tense, I eat, whereas when you're tense, you spout solid waste. I like you, Colonel Graff. I think we shall get along. I don't much care, Admiral Shamrajnagar. I came here for Ender, and neither of us came here for you. Ender hated Eros from the moment he shuttled down from the tug. He had been uncomfortable enough on Earth. Is that better? I think so. He had been uncomfortable enough on Earth where floors were flat. Eros was hopeless. It was a roughly spindle-shaped rock, only 6.5 kilometers thick at its narrowest point. Since the surface of the planetoid was entirely devoted to absorbing sunlight and converting it to energy, everyone lived in the smooth-walled rooms linked by tunnels that laced the interior of the asteroid. The closed-in space was no problem for Ender. What bothered him was that all the tunnel floors noticeably sloped downward. From the start, Ender was plagued by vertigo as he walked through the tunnels, especially the ones that girdled Eros's narrow circumference. It did not help that the gravity was only half of Earth normal. The illusion of being on the verge of falling was almost complete. There was also something disturbing about the proportions of the rooms. The ceilings were too low for the width, the tunnels too narrow. It was not a comfortable place. Worst of all, though, was the number of people. Ender had no important memories of the scale of the cities of Earth. His idea of a comfortable number of people was the battle school, where he had known by sight every person who dwelt there. Here, though, 10,000 people lived within the rock. There was no crowding, despite the amount of space devoted to life support and other machinery. What bothered Ender was that he was constantly surrounded by strangers. They never let him come to know anyone. He saw the other command school students often, but since he never attended any class regularly, they remained only faces. He would attend a lecture here or there, but usually he was tutored by one teacher after another, or occasionally, excuse me, trying to get comfortable here, or occasionally helped to learn a process by another student whom he met once and never saw again. He ate alone or with Colonel Graff. His recreation was in a gym, but he rarely saw the same people in it twice. He recognized that they were isolating him again, this time not by setting the other students to hating him, but rather by giving them no opportunity to become friends. He could hardly have been close to most of them anyway. Except for Ender, the other students were all well into adolescence. So Ender withdrew into his studies and learned quickly and well. Astrogation and military history he absorbed like water. Abstract mathematics was more difficult, but whenever he was given a problem that involved patterns in space and time, he found that his intuition was more reliable than his calculation. He often saw at once a solution that he could only prove after minutes or hours of manipulating numbers. And for pleasure, there was the simulator, the most perfect video game he had ever played. Teachers and students trained him step by step in its use. At first, not knowing the awesome power of the game, he had played only at the tactical level, controlling a single fighter in continuous maneuvers to find and destroy an enemy. The computer controlled enemy was devious and powerful, and whenever Ender tried a tactic, he found the computer using it against him within minutes. The game was a holographic display, and his fighter was represented only by a tiny light. The enemy was another light of a different color, and they danced and spun and maneuvered through a cube of space that must have been 10 meters to a side. The controls were powerful. He could rotate the display in any direction, so he could watch from any angle, and he could move the center so that the duel took place nearer or farther from him. Gradually, as he became more adept at controlling the fighter's speed, movement, direction of movement, orientation, and weapons, the game was made more complex. He might have two enemy ships at once. There might be obstacles, the debris of space. He began to have to worry about fuel and limited weapons. The computer began to assign him particular things to destroy or accomplish so that he had to avoid distractions and achieve an objective in order to win. When he had mastered the one fighter game, they allowed him to step back into the four fighter squadron. He spoke commands to simulated pilots of four fighters, and instead of merely carrying out the computer's instructions, he was allowed to determine tactics himself, deciding which of several objectives was the most valuable and directing his squadron accordingly. At any time, he could take personal command of one of the fighters for a short time, and at first, he did this often. When he did, however, the other three fighters in his squadron were soon destroyed, and as the games became harder and harder, he had to spend more and more of his time commanding the squadron. When he did, he won more and more often. By the time he had been at command school for a year, he was adept at running the simulator at any of 15 levels, from controlling an individual fighter to commanding a fleet. He had long since realized that as the battle room was to battle school, so the simulator was to command school. The classes were valuable, but the real education was the game. People dropped in from time to time to watch him play. They never spoke. Hardly anyone ever did, unless they had something specific to teach him. The watchers would stay, silently watching him run through a difficult simulation and then leave, just as he finished. "What are you doing?" he wanted to ask. "Judging me? Determining whether you want to trust the fleet to me? Just remember that I didn't ask for it." He found that a great deal of what he had learned at battle school transferred to the simulator. He would routinely reorient the simulator every few minutes, rotating it so that he didn't get trapped in an up-down orientation, constantly reviewing his position from the enemy point of view. It was exhilarating at last to have such control over the battle, to be able to see every point of it. It was also frustrating to have so little control, too, for the computer controlled fighters were only as good as the computer allowed. They took no initiative. They had no intelligence. He began to wish for his toon leaders so that he could count on some of the squadrons doing well without having his constant supervision. At the end of his first year, he was winning every battle on the simulator, and he played the game as if the machine were a natural part of his body. One day, eating a meal with Graf, he asked, "Is that all the simulator does?" "Is what all?" "The way it plays now. It's easy and it hasn't got any harder for a while." "Oh." Graf seemed unconcerned, but then Graf always seemed unconcerned. The next day, everything changed. Graf went away, and in his place, they gave Ender a companion. Let's see if I can adjust. All right, let's keep going. He was in the room when Ender awoke in the morning. He was an old man, sitting cross-legged on the floor. Ender looked at him expectantly, waiting for the man to speak. He said nothing. Ender got up and showered and dressed, content to let the man keep his silence if he wanted. He had long since learned that when something unusual was going on, something that was part of someone else's plan and not his own, he would find out more information by waiting than by asking. Adults almost always lost their patience before Ender did. The man still hadn't spoken when Ender was ready and went to the door to leave the room. The door didn't open. Ender turned to face the man sitting on the floor. He looked to be about 60, by far the oldest man Ender had seen on Eros. He had a day's growth of white whiskers that grizzled his face only slightly less than his close-cut hair. His face sagged a little, and his eyes were surrounded by creases and lines. He looked at Ender with an expression that bespoke only apathy. Ender turned back to the door and tried again to open it. "All right," he said, giving up. "Why's the door locked?" The old man continued to look at him blankly. So this is a game, thought Ender. Well, if they want me to go to class, they'll unlock the door. If they don't, they won't. I don't care. Ender didn't like games where the rules could be anything and the objective was known to them alone, so he wouldn't play. He also refused to get angry. He went through a relaxing exercise as he leaned on the door, and soon he was calm again. The old man continued to watch him impassively. It seemed to go on for hours, Ender refusing to speak, the old man seeming to be a mindless mute. Sometimes Ender wondered if he were mentally ill, escaped from some medical ward somewhere in Eros, living out some insane fantasy here in Ender's room. But the longer it went on, with no one coming to the door, no one looking for him, the more certain he became that this was something deliberate, meant to disconcert him. Ender did not want to give the old man the victory. To pass the time, he began to do exercises. Some were impossible without the gym equipment, but others, especially from his personal defense class, he could do without any aids. The exercises moved him around the room. He was practicing lunges and kicks. One move took him near the old man, as he had come near him before, but this time the old claw shot out and seized Ender's left leg in the middle of a kick. It pulled Ender off his feet and landed him heavily on the floor. Ender leapt to his feet immediately, furious. He found the old man sitting calmly, cross-legged, not breathing heavily, as if he had never moved. Ender stood poised to fight, but the other's immobility made it impossible for Ender to attack. What, kick the old man's head off? And then explain it to Graf? Oh, the old man kicked me, and I had to get even. He went back to his exercises. The old man kept watching. Finally, tired and angry at this wasted day, a prisoner in his room, Ender went back to his bed to get his desk. As he leaned over to pick up the desk, he felt a hand jab roughly between his thighs and another hand grab his hair. In a moment, he had been turned upside down. His face and shoulders were being pressed into the floor by the old man's knee, while his back was excruciatingly bent and his legs were pinioned by the old man's arm. Ender was helpless to use his arm. He couldn't bend his back to gain slack so he could use his legs. In less than 2 seconds, the old man had completely defeated Ender Wiggin. "All right," Ender gasped. "You win." The man's knee thrust painfully downward. "Since when," asked the man, his voice soft and rasping, "do you have to tell the enemy when he has won?" Ender remained silent. "I surprised you once, Ender Wiggin. Why didn't you destroy me immediately afterward? Just because I looked peaceful? You turned your back on me. Stupid. You have learned nothing. You have never had a teacher." Ender was angry now and made no attempt to control or conceal it. "I've had too many teachers. How was I supposed to know you'd turn out to be an enemy, Ender Wiggin?" whispered the old man. "I am your enemy, the first one you've ever had who was smarter than you. There is no teacher but the enemy. No one but the enemy will tell you what the enemy is going to do. No one but the enemy will ever teach you how to destroy and conquer. Only the enemy shows you where you are weak. Only the enemy tells you where he is strong. And the rules of the game are what you can do to him and what you can stop him from doing to you. I am your enemy from now on. From now on, I am your teacher." Then the old man let Ender's legs fall. Because he still held Ender's head to the floor, the boy couldn't use his arms to compensate, and his legs hit the surface with a loud crack and a sickening pain. Then the old man stood and let Ender rise. Slowly, Ender pulled his legs under him with a faint groan of pain. He knelt on all fours for a moment, recovering. Then his right arm flashed out, reaching for his enemy. The old man quickly danced back, and Ender's hand closed on air as his teacher's foot shot forward to catch Ender on the chin. Ender's chin wasn't there. He was lying flat on his back, spinning on the floor, and during the moment that his teacher was off balance from the kick, Ender's feet smashed into the old man's other leg. He fell in a heap, but close enough to strike out and hit Ender in the face. Ender couldn't find an arm or a leg that held still long enough to be grabbed, and in the meantime, blows were landing on his back and arms. Ender was smaller. He couldn't reach past the old man's flailing limbs. Finally, he managed to pull away and scramble back near the door. The old man was sitting cross-legged again, but now the apathy was gone. He was smiling. Better this time, boy, but slow. You will have to be better with the fleet than you are with your body, or no one will be safe with you in command. Lesson learned? Ender nodded slowly. He ached in 100 places. Good, said the old man. Then we'll never have to have such a battle again. All the rest with the simulator. I will program your battles now, not the computer. I will devise the strategy of your enemy, and you will learn to be quick and discover what tricks the enemy has for you. Remember, boy, from now on, the enemy is more clever than you. From now on, the enemy is stronger than you. From now on, you are always about to lose. The old man's face grew serious again. You will be about to lose, Ender, but you will win. You will learn to defeat the enemy. He will teach you how. The teacher got up. In this school, it has always been the practice for a young student to be chosen by an older student. The two become companions, and the older boy teaches the younger one everything he knows. Always they fight, always they compete, always they are together. I have chosen you. Ender spoke as the old man walked to the door. You're too old to be a student. One is never too old to be a student of the enemy. I have learned from the buggers. You will learn from me. As the old man palmed the door open, Ender leaped into the air and kicked him in the small of the back with both feet. He hit hard enough that he rebounded onto his feet as the old man cried out and collapsed on the floor. The old man got up slowly, holding on to the door handle, his face contorted with pain. He seemed disabled, but Ender didn't trust him. Yet, in spite of his suspicion, he was caught off guard by the old man's speed. In a moment, he found himself on the floor near the opposite wall, his nose and lip bleeding where his face had hit the bed. He was able to turn enough to see the old man standing in the doorway, wincing and holding his back. The old man grinned. Ender grinned back. Teacher, he said, do you have a name? Mazer Rackham, said the old man, and then he was gone. From then on, Ender was either with Mazer Rackham or alone. The old man rarely spoke, but he was there. At meals, at tutorials, at the simulator, in his room at night. Sometimes Mazer would leave, but always, when Mazer wasn't there, the door was locked, and no one came until Mazer returned. Ender went through a week in which he called him Jailer Rackman. Mazer answered to the name as readily as to his own and showed no sign that it bothered him at all. Ender soon gave it up. There were compensations. Mazer took Ender through the videos of the old battles from the first invasion and the disastrous defeats of the IF in the second invasion. These were not pieced together from the censored public videos, but whole and continuous. Since many videos were working Since many videos were working in the major battles, they studied bugger tactics and strategies from many angles. For the first time in his life, the teacher was pointing out things that Ender had not already seen for himself. For the first time, Ender had found a living mind he could admire. Why aren't you dead? Ender asked him. You fought your battle 70 years ago. I don't think you're even 60 years old. The miracle of relativity, said Mazer. They kept me here for 20 years after the battle, even though I begged them to let me command one of the starships they launched against the bugger home planet and the bugger colonies. Then they came to understand some things about the way soldiers behave in the stress of battle. What things? You've never been taught enough psychology to understand. Enough to say that they realized that even though I would never be able to command the fleet, I'd be dead before the fleet even arrived, I was still the only person able to understand the things I understood about the buggers. They realized, the only person who had ever defeated the buggers by intelligence rather than luck. They needed me here to teach the person who would command the fleet. So they sent you out in a starship, got you up to a relativistic speed, and then I turned around and came home. A very dull voyage, Ender. 50 years in space. Officially, only 8 years passed for me, but it felt like 500. All so I could teach the next commander everything I knew. Am I to be the commander then? Let's say that you're our best bet at present. There are others being prepared too. No. That makes me the only choice then, doesn't it? Mazer shrugged. Except you're still alive, aren't you? Why not you? Mazer shook his head. Why not? You've won before. I cannot be the commander for good and sufficient reasons. Show me how you beat the buggers, Mazer. Mazer's face went inscrutable. You've shown me every other battle 7 times at least. I think I've seen ways to beat what the buggers did before, but you've never shown me how you actually did beat them. The video is a very tightly kept secret, Ender. I know, I've pieced it together partly. You, with your tiny reserve force, and their armada, those great, big, heavy-bellied starships, launching their swarms of fighters, you dart in at one ship, fire at it, an explosion. That's where they always stop the clips. After that, it's just soldiers going into bugger ships and already finding them dead inside. Mazer grinned. So much for tightly kept secrets. Come on, let's watch the video. They were alone in the video room, and Ender palmed the door locked. All right, let's watch. The video showed exactly what Ender had pieced together. Mazer's suicidal plunge into the heart of the enemy formation, the single explosion, and then nothing. Mazer's ship went on, dodged the shock wave, and wove his way among the other bugger ships. They did not fire on him. They did not change course. 2 of them crashed into each other and exploded, a needless collision that either pilot could have avoided. Neither made the slightest movement. Mazer sped up the action, skipped ahead. We waited for 3 hours, he said. Nobody could believe it. Then the IF ships began approaching the bugger starships. Marines began their cutting and boarding operations. The video showed the buggers already dead at their posts. So you see, said Mazer, you already knew all there was to see. Why did it happen? Nobody knows. I have my personal opinions, but there are plenty of scientists who tell me I'm less than qualified to have opinions. You're the one who won the battle. I thought that qualified me to comment too, but you know how it is. Xenobiologists and xenopsychologists can't accept the idea that a star pilot scooped them by sheer guesswork. I think they all hate me because after they saw these videos, they had to live out the rest of their natural lives here on Eros. Security, you know. They weren't happy. Tell me. The buggers don't talk. They think to each other, and it's instantaneous, like the phylotic effect, like the Ansible. But most people always thought that meant a controlled communication like language. I think you a thought, and then you answer me. I never believed that. It's too immediate, the way they respond together to things. You've seen the videos. They aren't conversing and deciding among possible courses of action. Every every ship acts like part of a single organism. It responds the way your body responds during combat, different parts automatically, thoughtlessly doing everything they're supposed to do. They aren't having a mental conversation between people with different thought processes. All their thoughts are present together at once. A single person, and each bugger is like a hand or a foot? Yes, I wasn't the first person to suggest it, but I was the first person to believe it. And something else, something so childish and stupid that the xenobiologist laughed me to silence when I said it after the battle. The buggers are bugs. They're like ants and bees. A queen, the workers, that was maybe 100 million years ago, but that's how they started, that kind of pattern. It's a sure thing none of the buggers we saw had any way of making more little buggers. So when they evolved this ability to think together, wouldn't they still keep the queen? Wouldn't the queen still be the center of the group? Why would that ever change? So it's the queen who controls the whole group. I had evidence too. Not evidence that any of them could see. It wasn't there. Excuse me. It wasn't there in the first invasion because that was exploratory, but the second invasion was a colony to set up a new hive or whatever. And so they brought a queen. The videos of the second invasion when they were destroying our fleets out in the comet shell. He began to call them up and display the buggers' patterns. Show me the queen's ship. It was subtle. Ender couldn't see it for a long time. The bugger ships kept moving, all of them. There was no obvious flagship, no apparent nerve center. But gradually, as Mazer played the videos over and over again, Ender began to see the way that all the movements focused on radiated from a center point. The center point shifted, but it was obvious after he looked long enough that the eyes of the fleet, the eye of the fleet, like capital letter I, the perspective from which all decisions were being made was one particular ship. He pointed it out. You see it. I see it. That makes two people out of all those who have seen this video. But it's true, isn't it? But it's true, isn't it? They make that ship move just like any other ship. They know it's their weak point. But you're right. That's the queen. But then you'd think that when you went for it, they would have immediately focused all their power on you. They could have blown you out of the sky. I know. That part I don't understand. Not that they didn't try to stop me. They were firing at me. But it's as if they really couldn't believe until it was too late that I would actually kill the queen. Maybe in their world, queens are never killed, only captured, only checkmated. I did something they didn't think an enemy would ever do. And when she died, the others all died. No, they just went stupid. The first ships we boarded, the buggers were still alive, organically, but they didn't move, didn't respond to anything, even when our scientists vivisected some of them to see if we could learn a few more things about buggers. After a while, they all died. No will. There's nothing in those little bodies when the queen is gone. Why don't they believe you? Because we didn't find a queen. She got blown to pieces. Fortunes of war. Biology takes second place to survival. But some of them are coming around to my way of thinking. You can't live in this place without the evidence staring you in the face. What evidence is there in Eros? Ender, look around you. Human beings didn't carve this place. We like taller ceilings for one thing. This was the buggers' advance post in the first invasion. They carved this place out before we even knew they were here. We're living in a bugger hive, but we already paid our rent. It cost the Marines 1,000 lives to clear them out of these honeycombs, room by room. The buggers fought for every excuse me, the buggers fought for every meter of it. Now Ender understood why the rooms had always felt wrong to him. I knew this place wasn't a human place. This was the treasure trove. If they had known we would win that first war, they probably would never have built this place. We learned gravity manipulation because they enhanced the gravity here. We learned efficient use of stellar energy because they blacked out this planet. In fact, that's how we discovered them. In a period of 3 days, arrows gradually disappeared. Okay, try that again. In a period of 3 days, arrows gradually disappeared from telescopes. We sent a tug to find out why. It found out. The tug transmitted its videos, including the buggers boarding and slaughtering the crew. It kept right on transmitting through the entire bugger examination of the boat. Not until they finally dismantled the entire tug did the transmission stop. It was their blindness. They never had to transmit anything by machine, and so, with the crew dead, it didn't occur to them that anybody could be watching. Why did they kill the crew? Why not? To them, losing a few crew members would be like clipping your nails. Nothing to get upset about. They probably thought they were routinely shutting down our communications by turning off the workers running the tug, not murdering living sentient beings with an independent genetic future. Murder's no big deal to them. Only queen killing, really, is murder because only queen killing closes off a genetic path. So they didn't know what they were doing. Don't start apologizing for them, Ender. Just because they didn't know they were killing human beings doesn't mean they weren't killing human beings. We do have a right to defend ourselves as best we can, and the only way we found that works is killing the buggers before they kill us. Think of it this way: in all the bugger wars so far, they've killed thousands and thousands of living, thinking beings. And in all those wars, we've killed only one. If you hadn't killed the Queen, Mazer, would we have lost the war? I'd say the odds would have been 3-2 against us. I still think I could have trashed their fleet pretty badly before they burned us out. They have great response time and a lot of firepower, but we have a few advantages too. Every single one of our ships contains an intelligent human being who's thinking on his own. Every one of us is capable of coming up with a brilliant solution to a problem. They can only come up with one brilliant solution at a time. The buggers think fast, but they aren't smart all over. But on our side, even when some incredibly timid and stupid commanders lost the major battles of the second invasion, some of their subordinates were able to do real damage to the bugger fleet. What about when our invasion reaches them? Will we just get the queen again? The buggers didn't learn interstellar travel by being dumb. Oh, wait. The buggers didn't learn interstellar travel by being dumb. That was a strategy that could work only once. I suspect that we'll never get near a queen unless we actually make it to their home planet. After all, the queen doesn't have to be with them to direct the battle. The queen only has to be present to have little baby buggers. The second invasion was a colony. The queen was coming to populate the earth. But this time, no, that won't work. We'll have to beat them fleet by fleet, and because they have the resources of dozens of star systems to draw on, my guess is they'll outnumber us by a lot in every battle. Ender remembered his battle against two armies at once, and I thought they were cheating. When the real war begins, it'll be like that every time, and there won't be any gate I can go for. We've only got two things going for us, Ender. We don't have to aim particularly well. Our weapons have great spread. Then we aren't using the nuclear missiles from the first and second invasions? Dr. Device is much more powerful. Nuclear weapons, after all, were weak enough to be used on Earth at one time. The little doctor could never be used on a planet. Still, I wish I'd had one during the second invasion. How does it work? I don't know. Not well enough to build one. At the focal point of two beams, it sets up a field in which molecules can't hold together anymore. Electrons can't be shared. How much physics do you know at that level? We spend most of our time on astrophysics, but I know enough to get the idea. The field spreads out in a sphere, but it gets weaker the farther it spreads, except that where it actually runs into a lot of molecules, it gets stronger and starts over. The bigger the ship, the stronger the new field. So each time the field hits a ship, it sends out a new sphere, and if their ships are too close together, it can set up a chain that wipes them all out. Then the field dies down, the molecules come back together, and where you had a ship, you now have a lump of dirt with a lot of iron molecules in it. No radioactivity, no mess, just dirt. We may be able to trap them close together on the first battle, but they learn fast. They'll keep their distance from each other. So, Dr. Device isn't a missile. I can't shoot around corners. That's right. Missiles wouldn't do any good now. We learned a lot from them in the first invasion, but they also learned from us how to set up the ecstatic shield, for instance. The little doctor penetrates the shield as if it weren't there. You can't see through the shield to aim and focus the beams, but since the generator of the ecstatic shield is always in the exact center, it isn't hard to figure out. Why haven't I ever been trained with this? You always have. We just let the computer tend to it for you. Your job is to get into a superior strategic position and choose a target. The shipboard computers are much better at aiming the doctor than you are. Why is it called Doctor Device? When it was developed, it was called a molecular detachment device. MD device. Ender still didn't understand. MD. The initials stand for medical doctor, too. MD device, therefore, doctor device. It was a joke. Ender didn't see what was funny about it. They had changed the simulator. He could still control the perspective and the degree of detail, but there were no ship's controls anymore. Instead, it was a new panel of levers and a small headset with earphones and a small microphone. The technician who was waiting there quickly explained how to wear the headset. But how do I control the ships? Asked Ender. Mazer explained he wasn't going to control ships anymore. You've reached the next phase of your training. You have experience in every level of strategy, but now it's time for you to concentrate on commanding an entire fleet. As you worked with toon leaders in battle school, so now you will work with squadron leaders. You have been assigned 36 such leaders to train. You must teach them intelligent tactics. You must learn their strengths and limitations. You must make them into a whole. When will they come here? They're already in place in their own simulators. You will speak to them through the headset. The new levers on your control panel enable you to see from the perspective of any of your squadron leaders. This more closely duplicates the conditions you might encounter in a real battle, where you will know only what your ships can see. How can I work with squadron leaders I never see? And why would you need to see them? To know who they are, how they think. You'll learn who they are and how they think from the way they work with the simulator. But even so, I think you won't be concerned. They're listening to you right now. Put on the headset so you can hear them. Ender put on the headset. Salam, said a whisper in his ears. A lie? Said Ender. And me, the dwarf. Bean. And Petra. And Dink. Crazy Tom, Shin, Hot Soup, Fly Molo, Cairn Carby, all the best students Ender had fought with or fought against. Everyone that Ender had trusted in battle school. I didn't know you were here, he said. I didn't know you were coming. They've been flogging us through the simulator for 3 months now, said Dink. You'll find that I'm by far the best tactician, said Petra. Dink tries, but he has the mind of a child. So they began working together, each squadron leader commanding individual pilots and Ender commanding the squadron leaders. They learned many ways of working together as the simulator forced them to try different situations. Sometimes the simulator gave them a larger fleet to work with. Ender set them up then in 3 or 4 toons that consisted of 3 or 4 squadrons each. Sometimes the simulator gave them a single starship with its 12 fighters, and he chose 3 squadron leaders with 4 fighters each. It was pleasure. It was play. The computer controlled enemy was none too bright, and they always won despite their mistakes, their miscommunications. But in the 3 weeks they practiced together, Ender came to know them very well. Dink, who deftly carried out instructions but was slow to improvise. Bean, who couldn't control large groups of ships effectively but could use a few like a scalpel, reacting beautifully to anything the computer threw at him. Ally, who was almost as good a strategist as Ender and could be entrusted to do well with half a fleet and only vague instructions. The better Ender knew them, the faster he could deploy them, the better he could use them. The simulator would display the situation on the screen. In that moment, Ender learned for the first time what his own fleet would consist of and how the enemy fleet was deployed. It took him only a few minutes now to call the squadron leaders that he needed, assign them to certain ships or groups of ships, and give them their assignments. Then, as the battle progressed, he would skip from one leader's point of view to another's, making suggestions and occasionally giving orders as the need arose. Since the others could see only their own battle perspective, he would sometimes give them orders that made no sense to them, but they, too, learned to trust Ender. If he told them to withdraw, they withdrew, knowing that either they were in an exposed position or their withdrawal might entice the enemy into a weakened posture. They also knew that Ender trusted them to do as they judged best when he gave them no orders. If their style of fighting were not right for the situation they were placed in, Ender would not have chosen them for that assignment. The trust was complete, the working of the fleet quick and responsive. And at the end of 3 weeks, Mazer showed him a replay of their most recent battle, only this time from the enemy's point of view. This is what he saw as you attacked. What does it remind you of? The quickness of response, for instance. We look like a bugger fleet. You match them, Ender. You're as fast as they are. And here, look at this. Ender watched as all his squadrons moved at once, each responding to its own situation, all guided by Ender's overall command, but daring, improvising, feinting, attacking with an independence no bugger fleet had ever shown. The bugger hive mind is very good, but it can only concentrate on a few things at once. All your squadrons can concentrate a keen intelligence on what they're doing, and what they've been assigned to do is also guided by a clever mind. So you see that you do have some advantages: superior, though not irresistible, weaponry, comparable speed, and greater available intelligence. These are your advantages. Your disadvantage is that you will always, always be outnumbered. And after each battle, your enemy will learn more about you, how to fight you, and those changes will be put into effect instantly. Ender waited for his conclusion. So, Ender, we will now begin your education. We have programmed the computer to simulate the kinds of situations we might expect in encounters with the enemy. We are using the movement patterns we saw in the second invasion. But instead of mindlessly following these same patterns, I will be controlling the enemy simulation. At first, you will see easy situations that you are expected to win handily. Learn from them, because I will always be there, one step ahead of you, programming more difficult and advanced patterns into the computer so that your next battle is more difficult, so that you are pushed to the limit of your abilities. And beyond? The time is short. You must learn as quickly as you can. When I gave myself to starship travel, just so I would still be alive when you appeared, my wife and children all died, and my grandchildren were my own age when I came back. I had nothing to say to them. I was cut off from all the people that I loved, everything I knew, living in this alien catacomb and forced to do nothing of importance but teach student after student, each one so hopeful, each one ultimately a weakling, A failure. I teach, but no one learns. You, too, have great promise, like so many students before you, but the seeds of failure may be in you, too. It's my job to find them, to destroy you if I can, and believe me, Ender, if you can be destroyed, I can do it. So I'm not the first. No, of course you're not. But you're the last. If you don't learn, there'll be no time to find anyone else. So I have hope for you, if only because you are the only one left to hope for. What about the others, my squadron leaders? Which of them is fit to take your place? A lie? Be honest. Ender had no answer then. I am not a happy man, Ender. Humanity does not ask us to be happy. It merely asks us to be brilliant on its behalf. Survival first, then happiness as we can manage it. So, Ender, I hope you do not bore me during your training with complaints that you are not having fun. Take what pleasure you can in the in interstices of your work, but your work is first. Learning is first. Winning is everything because without it, there is nothing. When you can give me back my dead wife, Ender, then you can complain to me about what this education costs you. I wasn't trying to get out of anything. But you will, Ender, because I'm going to grind you down to dust if I can. I'm going to hit you with everything I can imagine, and I will have no mercy because when you face the buggers, they will think of things I can't imagine, and compassion for human beings is impossible for them. You can't grind me down, Mazer. Oh, can't I? Because I'm stronger than you. Mazer smiled. We'll see about that, Ender. All right, I'm going to cut that here and let's do a second part.